Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 6 of our 6-part Masters 25 full set review, where today we're going to look at all of the colorless cards. So for this set, that means artifacts and lands. Now, if you've been watching this series all along, you kind of know what to expect here. This is a limited set review. These are all reprints, so we kind of know what they do in Constructed, maybe with the exception of some of the new entries to Pauper. But today, it's all about Draft and Sealed. Now, quickly before we get started, just a really fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support what we do here at the channel, one of which is Patreon. You'll also find product links for Amazon linked below. And if you make any purchases once you go through one of those initial links, no matter what it is, we'll get a small percentage for the channel. And finally, Flipside Gaming is still offering a promo code for our viewers. They have Masters 25 as well as many other things there. And you can hopefully support the channel and save yourself some money at the same time. Thank you to everybody who looks at those links, but also thank you to all the viewers. I appreciate all of you. So with that being said, let's get into it. We'll start off with Assembly Worker. So this is one of the cards that is brand new to Pauper, free Pauper players out there. But beyond that, what are you going to do with this in Draft and Sealed? For the most part, in Draft, it's going to be a complement if maybe your draft isn't going so well. There are assembly workers we're going to look at in a few moments from the Colorless block as well coming up. So there are a few different things you can do. It's not just one synergy. There's also Mishras Factory we're going to look at. So if you happen to pick up a factory or two if you're lucky, and then these assembly workers and the ones that are coming up, which are all commons, well, you might have a little sub-theme there that could be quite interesting and might support you, especially if maybe you started off in one color and didn't go all that well for you in the draft. These are also good pickups in your seal pool because sometimes you don't have a real, true 100% like synergy between a couple colors or a certain archetype. So this is a nice way to supplement that and give you something to do while you're trying to work towards maybe more limited combos and such. So it's a fine creature to have. It's not going to be for every deck. You're either kind of all in on this or you're not, because this isn't very exciting as a 2/2 for 3. If you have enough reasons to play this, other targets, then wonderful. If not, you'll skip it. Chalice of the Void. Alright, this is a mythic. This is one of the big money cards of the set. But the big question is, what's the playability for Draft and Sealed? Well, not very good. If you see this in your sealed pool or your draft, you're probably not going to be super excited necessarily, other than the fact that after the event's over, you're probably going to be able to trade it for a lot of cards that you actually do want, or put it in a deck that you're building, perhaps. But while you're playing the game, it's not going to do a whole lot for you, unfortunately. I mean, are there moments you could side it in to exploit a particular weakness you see in someone else's deck? Like maybe, for example, you're in green, you have some larger creatures, you're playing against somebody that has a lot of 2-drops, like aggro or something. Sure, there's going to be these one-off circumstances where it might actually be good for you and you sideboard it in and you just try it out. But you don't really know what your opponent's going to be playing, and since this is a reciprocal effect, most of the time Draft and Sealed decks are going to have a pretty solid curve to them if you're building them correctly, typically. So you could hurt yourself just as much, if not more, than your opponent by playing this. So you just have to kind of pick and choose your spots and just grab it out of the sideboard if you feel like you can find advantage. Coalition Relic, great card for commander players. Glad to see this reprinted. Beautiful new art too, by the way. This is going to look really awesome in foil, I think. But what does it do for you? It fixes color. It ramps you a little bit too. So if you're in the market to do either of those two things, this will be there for you. If you're not too worried about that, let's say you have more of a 50-50 color deck and you don't have to worry about fixing, you're not necessarily worried about ramping into any large things, then maybe you skip this one. But for the most part, it's a fine card. Like, it's not going to be as good in, like, say, a red-white aggro deck, for example, because you have a lot of small creatures. You don't need a ramp. If you don't have any color considerations, if you're not splashing a third color, for example, then, okay, you'll skip it and just put another creature here at the 3 spot. But if you're playing maybe green and trying to splash a third color or something like that, all of a sudden this card is going to become a lot better for you. Ensnaring Bridge, another big money mythic here, actually. Key part of Lantern Control and Modern, as well as other decks. So, the big question, though, what can you do with this thing in your limited games? Well, not a lot. I mean, there are cases where you might be able to work it into your deck, and there are some one-off weird situations. Like, you could do something really strange, maybe, and try to do, like, an Is It Mill deck, if you get the right pieces to that, and try to basically stop the attacks on the ground, dump your hand, make your opponent draw their deck. That's a thing you could do, probably more so in Draft and Sealed, of course. But I don't know if that's going to be really effective, because if you're making your opponent draw a lot of cards, they're getting a lot of power. And that's the problem. There's no true, like, mill in the set. Like, you would have to mill through card draw, and that's very dangerous because you're giving your opponent all their tools. And if they're drawing their whole deck, hopefully they have an answer to this. You would think they would at some point, or at least they'd sideboard one in. Another way you could look at it is, well, maybe I'm in an aggro deck and I have all small creatures. I could play this, and if my opponent has larger things, I could just hold on to a couple cards and they won't be able to attack. I mean, you'll still have to get your attacks through, and there's ways to do that. But you could look at it that way. Again, is that super great? Maybe, maybe not. And it's probably more of a sideboard option once you know what your opponent is playing. Because if they're on aggro too, then you're just kind of wasting a card slot at the 3 spot, which could be important in a mirror matchup. So maybe you board it in if they're playing green or something like that. So you can tell I'm kind of stretching here. This is one that you're most of the time not going to find a place for, unfortunately. Heavy Arbalest. This card is not bad against certain matchups, but I don't see myself main decking it, mostly due to the expense and some of the hoops I have to jump through here. If I'm playing against aggro or something, maybe I bring it in, but it costs 3 and then 4 to equip, and then when I use it, like I put on a creature, I tap it for the ability, which is a good ability. It can hit any creature or player, so that's kind of nice. Blows up a lot of small creatures, why it would be good for aggro. But then it doesn't untap unless I either basically take it off, move it to another creature, or just remove it, or simply find another way to untap the creature. And there are a couple tricks that untap creatures in this set. The best combo is Horseshoe Crab, since for just 1 blue mana it can untap itself. If you don't have that, Freed from the Reel will work pretty well in a pinch. Just put that on a creature and then equip that creature. There are also some other untap effects that are one-offs that you can find in the set. Now, without a combo, I would still consider it if I had expendable mana like Green Mana Ramp, or maybe I'm playing an aggro deck and I'm concerned about getting that late damage across. Also, last thing you want to note about this card, it can target any creature. So there are times that we've seen over the past week that it makes sense to actually damage your own creatures. There's a couple creatures that will give you tokens when they take damage. So just don't forget that that's an option for you too. Nihil Spellbomb. This is all about graveyard. Hey, if you don't need to do anything to your opponent's graveyard, basically, you don't need to play this. But if they are dipping into the graveyard a little too much for your liking, then sideboard it in. That's kind of the bottom line here. If they're playing with Zombify, Hell's Caretaker, Regrowth, just cards like that, anything that's going to tamper with a graveyard, then you might be happy that you have this in your board. I'm probably not going to main deck it, though, because a lot of decks won't be doing that. It's also kind of nice that under the right circumstances, you can get it to replace itself, too. Perilous Mirror. This is actually a fine creature. It's a 1/1 for 2. When it dies, you get to do 2 damage to target creature or player. So again, you got versatility there. It can be your creature if need be, like we mentioned earlier with the other card. So that's a thing. But for the most part, even though it's really small, 1/1 for 2, sometimes it will hold your opponent's attacks back a little bit. This is especially good against those aggro decks again. And it's also good for aggro decks because it does give you another opportunity to perhaps be able to hit your opponent if you get to the point where you can't get your damage on the ground across anymore. There's other tricks you can do with this card, of course. Hell's Caretaker, for example, would be a fun one. If you could bring this back a number of times and keep sacrificing it, keep doing the damage, as long as your Caretaker can survive, that's actually pretty fun. But that's a rare. You won't see that all the time. But there are a lot of combos in this set. We've addressed many of them over the course of the week, but there's so many that I couldn't pack them all in here either. So just really think about a lot of the different ways these cards all interact together. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at some of the power you'll find in not only draft, but sealed pools. Primal Clay. This one is actually just kind of a okay curve filler card. It used to be probably more powerful back in the day, but it's got versatility, and I always like versatility. And that makes me say sometimes I might actually play this if I am desperate for something in the 4 spot or another creature. It's not unplayable by any means, but you are never going to feel great about what you get because you're either getting a 1/6 wall for 4, you feel like you overpaid, right? A 2/2 flyer for 4, you feel like you overpaid, right? Or a 3/3 ground creature for 4, which, okay, is maybe a little closer, but I still feel like I overpaid. So you're always overpaying. I guess you're paying for the versatility. And like I said, not unplayable, but a lot of times it doesn't make my cut. Prophetic Prism, color fixing card basically. I love the fact that it replaces itself. That's actually kind of sweet. But you're not gaining mana because you have to pay 1 to activate it. You're just fixing your colors. Great if you're going to splash a 3rd color, or you're getting greedy into a 3rd color, or even a 4th splash or something insane like that, which could happen. But that's why you play this. If your deck is more consistent, you probably just don't need it. Sigh of the Shinobi. This is an equipment card that's not doing a whole ton. I mean, it's a +1/+1. The upside is it's cheap. It only costs 1, 2 to equip, and it can also equip whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control. In that case, you do it for free. That could be kind of nice, especially if you're creating a lot of tokens or, again, maybe small aggro creatures. The only problem is small aggro creature strategy might not want to put this in their deck and slow down the pressure. I don't know. It's okay. I would at least try it out there. But other than that, I think this sits in the sideboard probably more often than not. Self-Assembler. Here's the other assembly worker that I was alluding to earlier. This one, of course, from Kaladesh. So this is a decent card. This has a little more heft behind it. It's a 4/4 creature for 5, and it's a common. So that's very important. You might just pick one of these up because you just need a creature with more heft. This set is very lean when it comes to power toughness. Some of the bigger creatures are in the higher rarities. So when you find a 4/4 common, it's actually not bad to probably grab at least one of these at some point just to have it. So, with that being said, is it better with Mishras Factory and the previous assembly worker? Of course it is. If you have a few of these cards, you can strategize between them, wonderful. But even as a 4/4 for 5, this isn't the worst thing in the world. It's better in multiples to some degree, right? Without clogging up your deck with too much of this stuff. But even a couple of these are good since one can tutor for the other. It's very playable. Maybe not for every build, but very playable. Strionic Resonator. This is a very playable card as long as you have triggered abilities. And let's face it, you should have a number of triggered abilities in your deck. So this is just a fun way to just get extra value for a couple mana, maybe even every turn or two. And there's some crazy things you can do. I mean, there's some powerful triggered abilities in this set, and it would take too long to go through all of them, even all the good ones. So I won't do that right now. But just look at your pool and then decide, do I have enough triggered abilities that I care about to run this? I think the answer most of the time is going to be yes, as a matter of fact. And it's a rare. You won't see it all the time. But when you get it, this could be a fun card. Sundering Titan. Good creature here. 7/10 for 8. It does not have evasion. So keep that in mind. It might be a little annoying if you do get this on the battlefield and you're playing against one of these go-wide decks. They can chump block it for a while. But with that 10 toughness, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to like joint block and get rid of it. And even if they do, that's going to still be a huge swing for you. There's a lot of ways to cheat this thing into play, too. We've been looking at them all week. There's Elvish Piper, there's Hell's Caretaker, there's Zombify. So if you can cheat this in, awesome. Like, get it faster than hard casting it for 8. Or you could ramp a little bit with green. That's an option, too. So if you can cheat the casting cost at least by a little bit, this card becomes that much more powerful. Also, keep in mind that enters and leaves the battlefield ability does affect all lands on the battlefield. But you get to choose which one specifically. So in other words, if you're in a situation where you have an island and a mountain in play and your opponent has a swamp and a forest, all 4 of those lands are being destroyed because you have to pick one of each kind. And if the only choices are your island and your mountain, you're going to lose yours. Now they're going to lose the swamp and forest as well, though, in that example. But if they have an island in play and you have an island in play, you can make them lose their island, you keep yours. So if they're on the same colors as you, this card actually gets a little bit better, I guess. But I'm not too worried about that because the size of this creature is just very formidable. And most of the time, obviously, you're still going to come out ahead of the whole land destruction thing for the most part because you're the one making the decisions. Although sometimes you will be trapped into losing some of your own lands too. Overall, great card. It's a rare. You won't see it all the time, but you'll play it probably if you have it. Also worth noting, if you can make the ability trigger multiple times, it can really mess up your opponent's land base. There's a few ways to pull it off in the set, like one example would be Cloud Shift in white. Swiftfoot Boots. Alright, this is an awesome, cheap piece of equipment. It costs 2, 1 to equip, but giving something haste and hexproof is huge. Especially that hexproof. I mean, haste is great too, but hexproof is going to protect the creature that really means the most to you. And there's a lot of removal spells, spot removal in this set. So that's going to help give something a little more longevity, maybe long enough for you to do more damage, even win a game with a particular creature that has evasion or something like that. Really good card to play. Treasure Keeper. This is a fine creature, 3/3 for 4, and that ability when it dies. Now granted, dies, so exiling will stop it. Also, a pacifism can kind of tie it up. But if it dies, and there are ways to make it die, sacrifice effects, for example, in black, then you get to activate the triggered ability for extra value. And again, could you imagine getting one of these like Hell's Caretaker and just bringing it back, sacrificing it, bringing it back? That could get kind of awesome. So that is a big combo enabler, that particular card. You want to look for a lot of opportunities to exploit that if you happen to get that card. It is a rare, of course, Hell's Caretaker, but if you get it, pay special attention to what else you have in your pool. All right, let's move on to lands with Ash Barrens. Awesome reprint for the Pauper crowd out there. I'm glad that they did this. So the question is, do you play this in limited games? Actually, I think a lot of the time you do. It's got two big upsides. One of which is it's a shuffle effect, and sometimes that's going to be very important for you. Maybe if you play Brainstorm, for example, it makes Brainstorm a lot better. Secondly, it's going to let you basic land cycle, and that's going to help you fix colors, and that's kind of awesome too, especially, again, if you're splashing or going deep when colors getting greedy. Now, if you're in a more like 50-50 color deck or something like that, and you don't care about the shuffle effect, then maybe you skip it, because you shouldn't have mana issues if you're like 50-50, and this will just slow you down a little bit most of the time. So, yeah, okay, I'll just run my regular lands, and that will be fine for me. But a lot of the time, in fact, probably most of the time, I think you use this. Cascade Bluffs. Okay, this is the first of the 5 Eventide enemy-colored filter lands. You'll find all 5 in the set. We'll look at the others quickly, but first let's talk about their general utilization as we look at Cascade Bluffs here. Now, the big question, are these good enough to play in Limited? And yes, they are. If you're in these colors, I think this is going to be a very welcome inclusion for you. These are all rares, so they're not going to show up all the time. When they do show up, they might not be in the right colors for you, but if you get lucky and they fall in the right color combination, I would play it because it is going to smooth out your game a little bit. The other thing you could do with this, of course, is maybe make one of these your splash color. For example, if I'm in a blue deck and I'm splashing red, this is still very playable. The one thing, though, you don't want to forget with these lands is if you don't have the mana of the color you need to pump into it to start the filter process here, then it can only tap for colorless mana. So when you're making your decisions about mulligans or keeps, don't forget that, because don't just glance at this and be like, okay, I got a red-blue source, I'm good, because that might not be the case if you don't have another red or blue source to put into it. So just be very careful. Don't make any hasty decisions when it comes to your mulligans when you see one of these. That would be my biggest piece of advice around them. But other than that, yes, they're going to be very good if you're in these colors or trying to splash one of the colors. Here's the second one. It's Fetid Heath, Flooded Grove, Rugged Prairie, and finally, Twilight Mire. Okay, Haunted Fengraf. First thing I want to point out before I get into the specifics behind this card, a lot of people ask me, if I have a land that just taps for colorless mana, but has an ability attached to it, is there any reason not to play it? I mean, it's giving me mana, it can be part of my mana base, and I don't have to take a spell slot with it. If I use the ability, wonderful. If I don't, I'm still tapping it for mana. My answer to that is yes and no. Maybe I have a deck that's a 50-50 split. I'm consistent on colors. I was going to play 8 mountains and 7 islands, and instead I play 7 and 7 in this. And yeah, you know what? That's fine. There's probably going to be no color issues if you do that, and you have the extra bonus ability thrown in there. Wonderful. However, other decks are not going to be that easy to work something like this in and feel like it's not going to have repercussions. For example, I'm splashing a third color, or I have a deck that's more like 80-20 two colors. Now, if I'm really worried about hitting my colors, especially in a timely manner, this could get in the way. Now, if I really like the ability, I could still put this in the deck, but I probably want to think of it as an 18th land or taking up one of my spell slots, as opposed to my mana base. That's a big difference. So keep that in mind when you're building your deck. If you feel like your colors are consistent, okay, you probably can pull that off. If you don't, though, then maybe if you really, really want the card, it becomes a spell more so than a land, and you just have to think of it that way going forward. There's a lot of cards we're about to look at that fall under that category, so I just wanted to throw that out there. Now for this card, I think it's okay. It costs 3, a little expensive, and you have to sacrifice it, and there's some high variance here because you don't know necessarily which creature you're going to get unless you only have one creature in your graveyard or something. But you know what? A creature is better than no creature, and if your mana base can support this, yeah, why not play it? Now, if your mana base can't support it, I'm probably skipping it most of the time, though. Mikokoro, Center of the Sea, another land that's going to give you colorless mana, so some of the stuff I said before applies. Also, too, the big question here is, when is it okay to let my opponent draw a card, even if I'm drawing a card? It's going to be certain decks is the answer. Maybe aggro decks this would be okay, because you're banking on the fact that you're going to be able to draw a card, your opponent's also drawing a card, but if I'm getting extra card draw, then I have cheaper stuff that I can play faster, where I'm hoping my opponent's stuff is going to get bottlenecked a little bit because they have bigger things. And if that's the case, it's a way for me to, early on in an aggro deck, hopefully not run out of gas and put across some fast damage. Problem is, the longer the game goes, the worse that strategy gets. And if you sit down against a mirror matchup, it's not a very good strategy at all, honestly, and it could backfire on you. Maybe it's a sideboard card in those situations, but again, it's a little inconsistent. So you want to be careful with stuff like this. Making your opponent draw a card is very, very dangerous, even if you're getting a card draw out of it too, especially if they have the more aggressive deck, for example. So just be careful with this one. I'm not going to say never board it in or never play it if you're playing aggro, but just be really considerate about the times you use it. Maybe it sees a little play here and there. This is more of a reprint for Commander. It's actually awesome for certain Commander decks. Mishras Factory. This is actually a really good inclusion here. And uncommon, these will be floating around a little bit. Another land that taps for colorless. This works fantastic with the other assembly workers we've seen. So if you have some of those in your deck, this is definitely a good pickup for you, no doubt. Beyond that, though, even if you're not all in on like assembly workers, this is still a good card because it's a land that turns into a creature, a 2/2 creature, and can get some damage across. Aggro decks might like something like that. Control decks may like this as a source of mana as well as a win condition, even as a 2/2 ground pounder that can keep getting in there turn after turn. So if you can control the battlefield with like a Chroma's Vengeance and some counter magic and stuff, this thing could perhaps even just let you ride it to victory from time to time. So that's one way to go with it. Again, aggro decks, like I said, they would love to have more pressure on the board. This is a way to put pressure on the board without even expending the mana other than the one to activate it when the time's right. So that's actually kind of sweet too. Really, really strong card. Don't overlook this one. Mirian Landscape. This is actually pretty good if you're trying to, fix colors, of course. And it's a little slower than a normal fetch land. Adjust expectations. It's going to come into play tapped. It's going to cost 2 and tap and sacrifice to get the ability. But then you do get to fetch up 2 basic lands to share a land type. So you can fix your colors that you're splashing for, or just trying to solidify what you're doing for your mana base. That could be a good thing. And then secondly, the other bonus to this is a shuffle effect. So it works well with cards like Brainstorm. So very nice to have. A lot of times you'll be happy to run something like this. Now again, is it as important if you don't care about the shuffle effect and you happen to have a 50-50 color deck or something like that? Of course not. Then it will just slow you down. But a lot of the times you'll be happy to play this. Pendelhaven, classic card from Legends here. This is good if you have some 1/1 creatures, especially if you also need green mana. Basically, not a lot else to say about it. Could you run this if you don't need the green mana, but you have a lot of 1/1 creatures? Sure. But again, maybe depending on the makeup of your deck, you might want to put it in the spell slot then as opposed to the land spot if you have too many colors going on or too many other things going on. But again, a aggro deck, like a 50-50 white-red aggro deck, you could throw this in as your 17th land and be just fine for sure. Complements a lot of the token strategies, a lot of the small creature strategies that we've been seeing. Quicksand. Again, this is a good card against a lot of the creatures we've been seeing. So, could you even main deck this? I think you could. I don't think you need to be up against a hyper aggro deck for this to be good or anything like that. I think you could just simply put this in your deck and find a target for it at some point. Keep in mind, though, this on the battlefield will telegraph itself, so your opponent will hold back a creature that they care about, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for you if it keeps some damage off you early on. Now, again, when you make your mulligan/keep choices, just remember a couple of things. This taps for colorless mana. And secondly, there's a good chance you might need to sacrifice it early on, especially if someone has a more aggressive build. You're going to need to ditch this land to keep the pressure off yourself in the early turns. And if that's the case, do you still have a good keep? That's what you want to think about. Rashad Import, good reprint here, especially for the legacy players. Is it good and limited? Actually, it's not bad because you can tap down your opponent's lands and put them off a color, perhaps if they're getting greedy. I don't know if I would always main deck it, but again, as long as my color base can support it as part of the mana base, then yeah, I would just play it. But again, if I'm trying to be a little more greedy myself and I'm worried about hitting my colors, is it worth taking up a spell slot then? I probably would wait till I see what my opponent's playing, because if this can't really hurt them that much, then I don't want it wasting a spot in my deck. If it can, though, I side it in. So again, they're splashing or getting aggressive into a 3rd or 4th color or something, or they have a non-basic land that I just really want to tap down, then yeah, this is great. I'm going to definitely side it in those cases. And like I said, many cases it will be main deckable too. Zodic Cavern. This is our last card. And again, it's another card that's not bad, especially if you're trying to be a little more aggressive. This way, if you need the land, it's a land, but also it's a 2/2 creature some of the time as well. I like that kind of versatility. Again, maybe this doesn't make all your builds, but it's a fine card. With that being said, we made it. That is the full set review for Masters 25. Hey, if you've been with us through all 249 cards, thank you. I really appreciate that. I hope you got something out of it if you're planning on playing some sealed or draft with this set going forward, because there's a lot of really fun gameplay that I think could be had here. I'm personally looking forward to it myself. A lot of amazing combos. We talked about a lot of them throughout the week, but I'll be honest, we couldn't cover them all. There were so many good interactions. So really pay attention to that when you look at your card pools. There's some really surprising synergies out there. Hey, Saturday, we're going to be back with a Market Watch. But until then, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.